Welcome to Mikun's Hardware. In this video I'm going to tell you about a few interesting facts which I have gathered while working on this channel and assembling different computers. These facts are going to be about Intel LGA 2011 platform, how to tune it, and how to squeeze a bit more performance out of your CPU, as well as what kind of mistakes you shall avoid and what you shall rather do instead of don't. I'm also going to talk a little bit about this very nice little cooler, which you can get from Amazon for just 17 euros, and what you can expect from it. I also have a few interesting things about branded X99 motherboards. In this particular case, I have MSI X99A SLI PLUS motherboard, which I have tested with the Xeon E5-2660 V3, and some information about AMD RX 5700 XT graphics card, and why I have decided to switch from AMD to Nvidia and started to use Nvidia RTX 2070 Super. Let's start with such important subjects such as driver installation. On some of the Chinese X99 motherboards, drivers are not being detected automatically by Windows 10. There is also some users who are still using Windows 7 or Windows 8, and these operating systems might fail to detect the required drivers for Chinese X99 motherboards to work. Personally, I always try to identify what kind of hardware I have on the motherboard, like for example if network card does not work or audio is not properly detected. I try to figure out what is the actual hardware, go to the official web page and install appropriate drivers for the hardware that I'm using and not properly working under my operating system. But it turns out that there are many users which are too lazy or not technical enough to do this stuff, and they are trying to use some kind of different utilities to install drivers for them. I have got a report from one of my subscribers that his motherboard Huananzhi X99-TF got completely bricked after trying to update drivers with one of such utilities. In his particular case, he was using Logic's driver updater. First, I didn't really believe him and thought that it might be something else. I have suggested him to try all possible things, but nothing worked. Eventually, he had to buy USB flash programmer, flash BIOS, and the motherboard went back to life. I did some research online and figured out that this problem has happened with a few other users as well. That's why I have decided to try it myself. In my case, I did not have Huananzhi motherboard because I have already sold them to my customers, but I still have Kllisre X99D8 motherboard, which is using Huananzhi X99 F8 BIOS. So I have downloaded a trial version of Logic's driver updater and tried to update drivers. But the trial version is very annoying. It lets me update only one driver at a time, and after each driver update the waiting time increase. So after I have updated one driver, I have to wait like 40 seconds, after the second driver update I have to wait a few minutes, and after the third driver update I have to wait for more than 40 minutes. I think trial version of software shall provide full functionality for a limited period of time and not being annoying like this, especially if the software is being sold for 40 euros. That's why I went to Russian torrents and found cracked portable version of Logic's driver updater and tried to use it. The updater of course identified whole bunch of drivers which were out of date, but before updating all the drivers I took a dump of my motherboard BIOS and compared it to the dump of the BIOS after applying all the updates. To my surprise, the BIOS was identical before and after the updates, so I thought it might be something else or it does not apply on Kllisre X99 motherboard. So I tried to restart my computer and figured out that my motherboard has got bricked. On the first load after the driver updates, Windows tried to install some system updates, but it never went through and the system hung. I waited for quite some time, nothing happened. I tried to reboot, and boom, motherboard has bricked. The only way to restore motherboard function was to use my USB flash programmer and flash the BIOS again. I am using the simplest and the cheapest CH341A mini USB flash programmer, which is applicable for most of the Chinese motherboards, except of Chinese X99Z. Online you can find multiple different software packages which you can use to operate this flash programmer, but I prefer to use open source and completely free of charge small tool which you can find on GitHub. Link will be provided in the video description. This software is available in English, Russian and some other languages. If you think it's necessary to make a detailed guide how to use USB flash programmer with this software, let me know in the comments down below and I will try to make it. But I think this is pretty self-explanatory software, very easy to use. You just need to connect your USB flash programmer through USB port to your computer, then connect the clip to the motherboard BIOS chip which you want to update. In the hardware menu of USB ASP flash, select appropriate device. After that, click on the button with a question mark. It will try to identify what is the BIOS chip of your motherboard. Select appropriate chip from the proposed options, and then you are free to do whatever you want. So, conclusion after this story is that do not try to use any kind of a fishy or not fishy, official or not official software packages which are claiming to automatically install drivers. With the latest Intel security vulnerabilities, Spectre and Meltdown, these kind of softwares are trying to install latest microcode updates, which often is touching the BIOS, and with the Chinese X99 motherboards, it turns them into bricks. Moving to the next subject. When I was assembling the workstation on Huananzhi X99 dual motherboard, I was looking for two identical, decent but not very expensive CPU coolers. After browsing my local stores, also checking second-hand market, I went to Amazon.de and found this beauty. For just 17 euros, I'm getting a very decent cooler, which is compatible with most of the relevant platforms such as Intel LJ 1150, 1151, 1155, 1156, but what's most important for me is that the cooler is compatible with Intel LJ 2011, 2011 version 3 and 2066. As a bonus, the cooler is also compatible with AMD AM4 platform. Initially I was a little bit skeptic about the cooler, but because it costed only 17 euros, I decided to give it a try. I bought 3 such coolers, 2 for the workstation build and 1 extra to get free delivery. 2 of the coolers have been successfully installed on my dual socket motherboard, they're looking pretty good and doing their cooling job very well. The third one has been sold to one of my subscribers. Thus, if you're looking for cheap but still very decent CPU cooler for your LJ 2011 version 3 Xeon, then I strongly recommend to take a look at Arctic Freezer 33 eSports 1. Unfortunately, this cooler is not widely available, and I know that in some regions it's being sold completely overpriced, but for 17 euros which it is available in Europe, this is a very good deal. I was able to identify only 2 nitpicking problems. First, the fan wires are very thin and I feel like they might get broken if I pull too hard. The other one is that the anti-vibration pads between the fan and the heatsink are kinda useless and falling down immediately. What is very cool about this fan is that its connector has extension to connect yet another fan. It is very important for Chinese X99 motherboard owners because those motherboards usually have only 1 or 2 fan connectors. Those motherboards also do not have option to regulate speed of 3-pin fans, and when you have just 1 or 2 4-pin fan headers, it's very nice to have an extender for 1 more fan, which is gonna be connected to your CPU fan. Next topic is overclocking DDR3 memory on Huananzhi X99-TF motherboard. Unfortunately, BIOS on Huananzhi X99-TF is a little bit misleading. When you install DDR3 memory on this motherboard and then go into the BIOS, the memory speed option will be missing. Instead, there will be an option called DDR3 memory voltage. In order to be able to get access to the memory speed option, you need to go and restore the defaults. This will hide the DDR3 voltage option and restore the memory speed option. In most cases, you have to do the following. Install your memory sticks, load into the BIOS, then restore the defaults, you will get your memory speed, select your memory speed, save the changes, reboot, go back to the BIOS, and then you can adjust memory timings and memory voltage. But sometimes it happens, especially with the DDR3L memory, that the motherboard is picking 135 volts by default for the memory voltage. Such voltage is not enough for the memory to start at DDR3-1866 or DDR3-2133. But the memory is capable to work at this speed with voltage at 1.5 volts. Still, with this BIOS limitation, it's not possible to pick memory speed and memory voltage at the same time. After restoring BIOS defaults, motherboard is setting memory voltage to auto, and auto results to 135 volts. Then you pick your speed DDR3-1866 or DDR3-2133, trying to reboot, and your system fails to boot because your RAM is not able to work at DDR3-1866 or DDR3-2133 with voltage 135 volts. The solution is to prepare and flash custom BIOS where 1.5 volts would be the default DDR3 voltage. What you have to do is to dump your motherboard BIOS and then use AMI BCP tool to update default values of the BIOS. Link for all of the required software will be in the video description. Using AMI BCP tool, you can open your BIOS file, update the default settings, and then save it. After that, you can use FPT tool to flash your updated BIOS, and then when you restore BIOS defaults, your memory voltage will be set to 1.5 volts. Thus, even though DDR3 memory voltage is not available for you, its value is set to 1.5 volts, and now you can safely pick your memory speed such as DDR3-1866 or DDR3-2133. Now your memory will be able to work at the desired speed, of course if your memory was able to work at those speeds with 1.5 volts at the first place. I hope this little piece of information will help someone to squeeze a bit more performance out of the DDR3 memory on Huananzhi X99-TF motherboard. Now let's have a little talk about the graphics cards. I have been using AMD RX Vega 64 graphics card for quite some time, and I was quite happy with it. It's a reference model, it's hot and loud, but it's okay. And in the games I play the most, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Battlefield 5, it's actually beating GTX 1080 quite substantially. Still, I was curious to know what's going on with the latest AMD RX 5700 XT graphics cards. I have checked and watched a few reviews, especially from Hardware Unboxed. The performance of AMD RX 5700 XT in Red Dead Redemption 2 and Battlefield 5 is quite much better than RX Vega 64. Then I have seen a few videos and lots of different reports saying that these graphics cards have some serious driver issues. That's why I decided to buy myself an RX 5700 XT and see if I can replicate those drivers' issues. Trying to pick different models, I decided to go with one of the cheapest one, and that was XFX RX 5700 XT Thick 3. The graphics card is huge, but it's looking really good. For my dual socket workstation video, I have used this XFX 5700 XT as the benchmarking card, and I did not have any issues with it. I have tried it in a few systems which had Nvidia graphics card before. I did not have to use display driver uninstaller or DDU, just download latest AMD drivers, install it, and everything is working as it should. The performance in Red Dead Redemption 2 and Battlefield 5 is significantly better when compared to GTX 1080 and RX Vega 64. Thus I was quite happy with it. The thing I was not very happy with is the GPU temperature. The temperature was going up to 80 degrees Celsius and sometimes even more. Still, the graphics card was quiet, so I thought I could manually tune some of the fan curves and get it a bit cooler. After using it as my test bench graphics card and finishing my workstation video, I have swapped my RX Vega 64 to RX 5700 XT for my daily usage. Unfortunately, it did not go as well as I would hope for. My workstation is Threadripper 1950X with lots of PCI Express lanes and lots of PCI Express slots. I have a few expansion cards there, such as video capture card, extra network card, and extra SSD expansion card. I also have 3 monitors connected and Oculus Rift S VR headset. With such setup, I started to get all sort of issues during my daily workload. First of all, my Overmedia Live Gamer HD refused to record videos. As soon as I try to capture input video, the program just hangs. I have tried to update the drivers, install, reinstall, nothing happened. With RX Vega 64 it works, with RX 5700 XT it does not. It was very disappointing and I even thought of changing my video capture card, but I'm happy I didn't do that. The other issue is that Oculus Rift S was causing black screen and blue screen of death. For example, when closing Oculus Rift S application, my screens were going black or half black. After a while, screens were going back to normal, but it was very annoying. Closing my Oculus Rift S application and I have to sit there and wait for 10-15 seconds for my screens to go back to normal state and don't be black or half black. What was even more annoying is that using my VR headset was causing blue screen of death quite frequently. Quite a few times I was also able to spot some glitches, for example when a game for some reason was spanning across multiple displays. I start my game on one monitor, but for some reason it's leaking out to the other monitor. There were no obvious reasons of when this happening and why this happening and how to fix it. OBS was also crashing every now and then when I was trying to record videos, especially if Google Chrome is open. Thus, after collecting all of these problems, I have decided that it's enough. Unfortunately, my XFX RX 5700 XT Thick 3 was sent back to Amazon. I have got full refund for the graphics card and switched back to my RX Vega 64. After a short while, I was able to get a very good deal on MSI RTX 2070 Super for almost the same price as RX 5700 XT. Thus, I have decided to give it a shot and see how Nvidia graphics card is gonna behave in my system with so many expansion cards and with the Threadripper CPU. First of all, I have used my RTX 2070 Super as the benchmarking GPU for testing Xeon E5-2660 V3. After that, I have installed it into my own workstation and now I'm happily using RTX 2070 Super. So far, I did not get a single glitch, a single problem. I have tried Overmedia Live Gamer Capture, I have tried OBS, I have tried Oculus Rift S. Everything working as intended. And yes, maybe in Red Dead Redemption 2 the performance is not as high as RX 5700 XT, but this graphics card works, and it works well with all the other things I have to do on my workstation. Thus, if you're working on a video production, you have some kind of a weird setup where you have lots of expansion cards and maybe not very common CPU, then I would recommend you to stay away from RX 5700 XT. On the other hand, if you're looking for a very decent GPU for a reasonable price, you have just one monitor and a typical gaming setup, then RX 5700 XT is a very good option. Usually it costs about €100 less than RTX 2070 Super, but it provides very similar performance. And the last subject for this video is tuning Xeon E5-2660 V3 CPUs on branded and not branded motherboards. When testing Chinese X99 motherboards, I was always upset that it's not possible to overclock memory to higher speed than the default Intel specification. Now I have got myself a branded MSI X99A SLI PLUS motherboard. Unfortunately though, this is also not possible to overclock memory with these Xeons. Thus, I start to believe that it's not the problem with the Chinese motherboards, it's just the limitation of the CPUs. Another problem was that the CPU TDP limit is not possible to exceed. For example, when doing Turbo Boost Unlock on Xeon E5-2660 V3, maximum speed on all cores should be 3.3 GHz. But when the CPU starts to exceed power consumption limits, it starts to downclock itself, even if the turbo boost procedure was applied correctly. This is very annoying behavior, but it is what it is. I was really hoping that on a branded motherboard it would be possible to exceed the power limitation of the CPUs. Sadly though, it's not possible. Thus again, this is not problem of the Chinese motherboards, it's the problem or limitation of these CPUs. One more thing I was hoping to get from the branded motherboards is to be able to overclock the CPUs using BCLK or the base clock. Unfortunately, there are two limiting factors. First of all, it's very unlikely that you will be able to get stable system with BCLK over 110. In my case, maximum I was able to achieve was 105. The other problem is that when you increase BCLK, CPU is starting to work at higher frequency. That's why it requires more power, or rather more voltage, to be stable at this frequency. With more voltage, it consumes more electricity, thus it's starting to hit the power consumption limit faster. Thus, in some cases, it may clock itself lower under full load than without BCLK overclock. This is very sad, but these are true facts. So all in all, performance of Xeon E5-2660 V3 CPUs, which are completely locked and do not support any kind of overclocking, on Chinese and branded motherboards is almost identical. The only significant upside of the branded X99 motherboards is that it's possible to adjust memory voltage. Usually you can tighten memory tightens much tighter with 135 volts compared to 1.2 volts. On all the Chinese X99 motherboards I have tested, you are limited to 1.2 volts on the memory voltage. That's why you are not able to tighten memory timings as much as you would be able to do that on a branded X99 motherboard which supports proper memory voltage regulation. CPU power consumption throttling can be reduced or completely avoided if you downvolt your CPU. Fortunately, you don't need to do anything in the BIOS for this thing. What you have to do is you have to use different EFI driver. The default driver is not changing the CPU voltage at all, but most of the Xeon E5-2660 CPUs can work at a slightly lower or significantly lower voltages. It really depends on how good your particular CPU is. Some of them can go to up to minus 100 mV, others can only tolerate minus 10 mV. In the video description I will provide a link where you can download lots of different drivers for single socket and dual socket motherboard with a different negative voltage offset for the CPUs. You can download all of them on your flash drive, then you can start with the biggest undervolting and reduce the value until you find the stable configuration. Xeon E5 V3, they have two different voltages. One is CPU voltage, another one is memory controller voltage. The first one is negative offset in millivolts for the CPU voltage, and the second one is negative offset in millivolts for the CPU memory controller. Experiment with different drivers and find which one is the most suitable for you. If you think a dedicated tutorial of how to undervolt your turbo unlocked Xeon E5-2660 V3 CPU is required or important, let me know in the comments down below. I will see if I have enough time and desire to make such tutorial. For now, that's all I have for you. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, I hope you have enjoyed it, I hope you have found it useful. Goodbye.